Hello, Widowhood. Our guest today is Miss Sarah Hines. She has been down, as she will say, the beautiful road of grief for over 25 years. She has been a champion for people on their grief journey, for those that are transitioning from this world, and also now moving into how to help people with grief and employers in the workplace.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Thank you. Such an honor.
Oh, thank you. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
I don't even know where to begin.
Wherever you want. This is your moment to shine.
I have been a lover of relationships in the sphere of grief and death for about 25 years now. And it has led to so many beautiful relationships and opportunities, and that I ended up using a background in hospice care and death care. And I combined that with my work life inside of technology and sales. And I created a little company called Grief Advocacy, where we help organizations talk about and change and revise policies around their workplace bereavement. So it's been a long, beautiful road, to be completely honest with you.
Okay.
I feel quite honored. Yeah.
So what was the catalyst 25 years ago?
Oh, a friend of mine, it was, well, see, now we're dating ourselves.
Okay, let me
I,
just put it out there. I'm 57. I'm good with it. So 1966, do the math. I'm hydrated. Go ahead. Here's my water right here. So no, go ahead. I'm okay with it. You don't get that wisdom unless you've had some journeys around the sun. So it's and we're using this to
I
help
hear
other people. So it's to their benefit.
you got it. So I started, a friend of mine was dying of AIDS.
Mm,
And 25 years ago, when there were, the community was shunning even the gay community was shunning people with AIDS, and their medications weren't working and no one knew what to do. And so I went into kind of activism mode, and supported him when his family didn't, the community didn't, through to the end of his life. And it absolutely infuriated me that people were dying alone. So I started working more inside of hospice care, which is really kind of the last line of defense, if you must, right? And I worked with men that were dying of AIDS, and it was such an honor. But I was young, right? And I had that warrior spirit, and I said, "Look, give me more like this. I need more. I need to care for more people." And I started caring for children that were in hospice, and that unfortunately hardens you a little bit.
mm. So what were the lessons that you learned 25 years ago in your initial place of being an advocate for someone?
It's quite a humbling experience to be part of that beautiful moment with somebody, that I really wanted to advocate for everyone to have a chance to honor the people they love in a beautiful way. And that was why I really decided that I had to focus on creating space around that honor. And that's what led me to home hospice. That's what led me to into death care, and then led me back into grief care. So it's been just a beautiful journey through hard things, really.
I'm going to ask you to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
People do not always connect the idea of beauty with death. People are
No.
going, what? Like make that make sense to me that you're saying these two words together.
Yeah.
And I want you to try to do that without using the word beauty.
Ooh, okay.
I want you to be descriptive,
For sure.
even if you share some experiences, but I want you to really, I'm the person going to explain that to me, and I want you to make me understand that.
So Tina, the best way I can do that is through story. Okay, so I was taking care, I was in home hospice. I was a volunteer for home hospice. And I was caring for a wee one. She was about 18 months old. Her name was, or is, Bree. Brianna was her name. And she had, when she was awake, she had no emotion whatsoever. When you looked in her, she had these big, beautiful dark eyes. And when you looked into those beautiful, sparkly little eyes, it almost looked like she was looking through you. There
Mm,
was no, there was no joie de vivre. And so really you just spent your time trying to pull emotion out of her face so you could just get a glimmer of it just once or twice. But when she fell asleep, her face was full of emotion.
wow.
She'd smile, she would laugh. You could see her eyebrows going up and down. You could see her teeth, those little wee teeth that were coming in. It was the most beautiful thing. And as her caregiver, I would I would feed her like her bottle just a little bit earlier than because you wanted to get to that moment. You wanted to get to that moment where you saw the life in her face. And I had been doing this for quite some time. And I sat down at in the dining room table and I was feeding her a bottle. And just watching her face light up, it brought tears to my eyes because it was beautiful. It was so beautiful. And it was all the only thing you wanted was to see it. And I just used the word beautiful, and I'm sorry,
It's
but
okay. Go ahead. It was a test.
it
It
was
would work. Go ahead.
it was so amazing to see. Um, and because I was crying a little bit, her mom came out and was leaning against the door frame watching. And it wasn't until I looked up at her and she saw me crying. And she goes to me with all the love in her face I can imagine. And she goes, "Aren't we the lucky ones?" And I went, "I feel so special. I feel like I am one of the very few people on the face of this planet that get to see that." And nothing fills me that way. There's nothing in this world that fills me that way. And she goes, "I feel like I'm the luckiest mom on the planet." That
Mm,
story encapsulates exactly the feeling. And from a space that was never thought of as beautiful, it was thought as devastating, as I don't know what I would do with my life. The worst thing that could possibly happen to anyone. And to have the mother turn to me and say, "Aren't we the lucky ones?" was put
mm,
everything I was working towards into perspective. And it felt selfish caring for
wow.
her. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That describes beauty. For people that may be listening to this conversation, can you explain the difference between hospice, home hospice, and end of death care?
Yeah. So we have palliative care, right, as the first kind of foray into critical illnesses.
Okay.
And, and palliative care really is uh, caring, don't get me wrong, but more from a medical perspective, right? So when you go to palliative care, it doesn't necessarily mean you are closer to death. It means that we are working inside of a critical illness that may result in death. But we're going to work really hard from a medical perspective and a care perspective to ensure that doesn't happen.
Okay.
When death then becomes inevitable, you have the option of going to hospice.
Okay.
And in many instances, hospice is an actual building, like they have lots of children. Hospice is really about providing comfort for end of life as a priority
Hmm.
versus medicine. right? So medical kind of becomes secondary at this point, and it's more about creating comfort.
Okay.
And in home hospice, what you have the I guess the advantage of home hospice is that you get to do that in the comfort of your own home. So a lot of people choose to die at home. Not a lot, I think, and it depends on where you are and what year you're in, but I believe about 80% of people still die in a hospital. But home hospice is the option where you can actually die at home.
So if a person is looking to engage one of these types of care, do you know the first step that they go to start working with that, or how do they go about
Yeah,
that process?
yeah. So typically, once you've gotten the systems, will lead you through and make referrals into different centers for you. And a lot of them are connected to each other. So a lot of palliative care teams inside of hospitals will be connected to hospice centers or hospice caregivers that will come
Mhm.
into your home and will help you through that system. But like I think it's something that we still have to call out for ourselves. We absolutely need to advocate for ourselves and for our loved ones. So
Yeah.
it needs to do a little bit of research, and I know that hospitals have a lot of information on these types of services. So there's lots out there to help, that's for sure. But it really needs an advocate voice inside of it to make sure that you have all your options present, right? Not just while you're dying,
Mhm.
but also after, right? Do we know what's legal in your state or in your province in Ontario? Do you actually know, or are you so used to calling a funeral home that's the only option, right? So there's so much education that has to be done in this realm that I feel like the opportunities are really endless to really give people the proper choice.
You brought up a good question that I was actually thinking that if I'm someone that's looking to have someone, my insurance gives me options. I liken it to the idea you may be referred to a particular doctor, but that doesn't mean you feel like connected to that doctor. What are some questions that one should ask
Mm.
of someone that's recommended to them for any of these different cares for their loved one or for the person that needs the care? Maybe they're still in the ability to ask the questions themselves.
I think having it's really interesting about finding questions because I think the first step is having the courage to have the conversation. I don't think a lot of people want to have the conversation. It's interesting because I think, and I may get a little, hold on tight. That's what I'm going to say, Tina. I'm going to say, hold on tight.
Okay.
I, I'm going to start this. I'm going to answer this question perhaps with another
Okay.
more
No,
philosophically.
I prefer the long answer. We don't want yes or no's. The widowhood wants to learn. The widowhood wants to dive into your mind. There are people, so let's get the perspective. Widowhood
Okay.
Real Talk with Tina across 70 different countries. S-
Okay.
Some people have lost a loved one. Some people are the friends of someone who has lost a loved one. Some of our people in the widowhood are couples who have not ventured down this road, but are trying to educate themselves for what may need to happen. Some of our listeners are children who have aging parents and trying to lean into the process that is before them. So this is an educational opportunity for people to learn or people to understand what they may need to put in place for their loved ones because they're being proactive. So, oh my, I want all of the tea, as they would
All
say,
of it.
hold, yeah, you don't have to hold anything back. We're not, that's why it's called real talk. This may be very graphic, this may be some trigger warning, but hence the conversation. We're talking about death. Yes, these are things that we don't talk about that I'm trying to bring to the forefront because we need to talk about them because when we're at that point of making decisions, we're too emotional. Our best part of our mind isn't showing up. And if we're able to do a little bit of the advanced work, I think it helps us. Sometimes we have to do it when our feet hit the ground, but if there's an opportunity to learn from someone such as yourself, this helps other people.
Okay, well, then I have a great answer. The one thing that I really hope for is that when people sit bedside with a loved one that is dying, that they hold on to gratitude before they hold on to hope.
Hmm.
And I know that that is such a difficult thing to do. But I can say that having sat bedside with quite a few families over the course of my life, people always have hope, and they spend their whole time hoping instead of sitting inside of the moment they are actually in
Mm.
and have gratitude for not only the life that they've had with this person, but what they've learned from that person and how they will continue to honor that person's legacy in life.
Okay.
And then have hope. Because what you hope for changes the moment you have gratitude first. So, what questions do we ask at the end of life when you have gratitude before you have hope? I highly recommend it be a conversation that you can have that is free of systemic boundaries. I don't turn around to, well, actually, I'll do it with another story. I've been obviously talking about this for quite some time, and my children are quite used to having this conversation with me. And every Friday on the way to school, I walked my kids to school when they were little. They were tired. Friday morning, they had had just about enough. They didn't want to do it. So I'd put like 10 little mini marshmallows in my pocket, and I would ask them questions. And every time they got the questions right, they got a marshmallow. And the walk went by super quick. It was Friday. It made it light. Everybody was happy. But one of the questions I would always, not always, but randomly ask is, if you died before me, what do you want? And they would always come back with something. I want everybody to be dressed, everyone to get a Dora the Explorer backpack. And they would always come back with something really outside of the realms of like bureaucratic boundary. And it would be beautiful, right? So my son said to me, we're at the grocery store and I'm on one side getting apples or something. He's on the other side picking grapes and eating them or something like that. And he goes, Mom, I have finally decided what I want when I die. And I said, great. And there's people around and they're looking at me like, oh my God, this poor boy's dying. And I'm like, okay, so if that happens, tell me what you want. He goes, I want you to burn my body, and then I want you to put me inside of fireworks. And then when I go out to a field and when everybody is eating cake and singing songs, I want you to light up the fireworks so I sprinkle on top of everyone's heads. And I said, that sounds like a beautiful way to go. And this old woman's sitting back and she's nodding her head. She goes, I like that. And I said, yeah, me too. So this conversation that we've had, that I had with my son, or I had with my kids on the walk to school, was imaginatory. Like it had this imagination to it that was not within the boundaries of what we think, right? And I can tell you, I can do that. I can make sure that his cremains go into a firework and we put them in. No, I can do that, right? That is possible. So he's changed his mind since then.
Oh, well, of
So, you know.
course.
But the conversation continues to go and evolve, and the conversation is part of our life. So when I turn around and I ask someone, what do you imagine a celebration at the end of your life to look like? And they said, well, yeah, I want to be buried, like older people go, I want to be buried by my husband or my wife. I want like to be wearing this blue dress. Like they have a very like, and they do it inside of the confines of what we traditionally celebrate, right? And I said, okay, but that's your burial. What about the celebration?
Mm.
And the moment it's reframed as the celebration, it turns into something different. I'm like, songs will come up. I want you to play this song. I want to make sure that when you put my obit, that you've got my good picture, right? I make sure they don't put too much makeup on my face. My mom says, I don't want anyone touching my body. No one touches my body. You're the only one that touches my body. I want it to go, I want to be dead, and then I want to be burned. And in between that, no one touches my body. Right. So people have a wide, broad perspective of what it should look like. And I'm going to say to you that most of them can happen, but we just don't know it. Right. We get stuck in that confine of we're at the hospital, someone's going to call a funeral home, and that's the end of my responsibility.
You make some I love the continual conversation with your children. And I would agree, having that conversation is important. My late husband and I were together for 32 years. In the very beginning of our marriage, we talked about what we wanted when one of us was not here. Some people thought that was morbid. Some people thought that was creepy. Some people thought, why are you talking about death now? Shouldn't you just be excited about being married? But you take these vows and say, till death do us part. So in my mind, I'm taking it serious that one day it will be till death do you part. What does that look like? And I knew he wanted to be cremated. I knew that he wanted his ashes to be spread on a hunting ground that he grew up hunting on with him and his three brothers and his dad. I knew that he wanted this, I didn't do. He wanted his ashes to be turned into a diamond earrings for me to wear. I knew that he wanted me to redate and marry. I knew he had a DNR, do not resuscitate. Let me not use acronyms. I knew all those things that we talked about. We put away what the economic plan would look like for the surviving spouse. So fast forward 29 years later, I'm sitting in a hospital room with a doctor on their knees after they've resuscitated my husband 11 to 15 times and asking me, what do I want to do now? And to have the peace of knowing his decision already was one less added stress. I didn't have to consider if I was making the right choice, if I was doing the right thing, what would he want? As life would have it, as I was talking with the doctor and about to execute what Mark wanted, he passed. But knowing already what he wanted made that part of that experience that much easier. And I think we've lost each other again.
You got
And
me?
I cannot imagine what that would look like. The added level of stress in trying to make those types of decisions. And I expound on that because I think we're dating, we're in relationships, but we don't talk about, we say if something happens. I don't know anybody that gets out alive. I mean, there's maybe two people that I've read in the Bible that were, I mean, Jesus died. I mean, I think there was only one person that was raptured up. And besides that, there's one exit point. No one's
That's
thrilled
it.
about it, but I think there's a way to embrace it. And I
Yes.
love what you're presenting to think about the celebration of our own life. We should be celebrating while we're living it, and people can celebrate it in our absence.
Got it. And it comes down to this simple sentence, right? When we hear people say, oh, I don't want to be a burden, right? You deciding not to be a burden is actually a burden.
I know, because
Right?
you just tell me you want this, and this. Because when I'm sad, did they want this dress? Do they want a DNR? Did they want to be buried underneath a tree? Did they want to not even have the whole cemetery? All those things, I think, that's a gift to give someone. that that
Sure.
would have to execute that on your behalf. You're right. You're making it harder on the people that have to do it by not saying something. But I don't
That's
think
it.
we like to think of our own demise.
No, and I can tell you when people grieve, and this is what took me from death care back into grief, was because I have a feeling that I was getting a deep sense that people were not able to grieve properly at the, and I say properly with bunny ears,
I was
right?
going to
Because
ask
let's
you
just say,
to unpack that.
yeah, that's just a big thing, right? But they aren't able to grieve. Maybe I take the properly right out of that sense. They aren't able to actually grieve because they're so busy with the operations of things,
Hmm.
right? So there's this ripple effect from not planning that actually goes well beyond your death, and it affects the next death and the next death, and it actually creates this phobic culture of not being able to embrace endings, right?
Hmm.
If I can't embrace it, I'm holding it in. And now I'm filled with sorrow, sadness, anger, resentment. And everyone says, well, you should get over it. You should be over it by now, right? It's been long enough. When are you going to move on? Right. And the problem with it ultimately is that if I let go, I've got nothing left.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the situation where I believe grief should be me holding it in. We don't talk about that openly. Me being sad and now becoming recluse, this is what grief looks like. What advice would you give to someone trying to give themselves permission to lean into their grief and
Mm.
to really embrace it so that they can at some point continue living?
Um, Grief doesn't go away ever. So remove the expectation that you will ever be over it, that it'll ever be gone, that it'll ever be okay, because it never, ever, ever will be okay. It will always be sad. It will always hurt. What we can do is learn how to carry it differently. And so often we talk about getting rid of grief. I like to reframe it as developing a skill around grieving. And the idea that we ebb and flow with grief. Some days it's really big, and some days it's actually not even there. But grief will always remind you that this could be the last day you see somebody, that every day matters, and it will always dare you to love again. And I look at that sphere of skill that you're building inside of this emotional ball of craziness a lot of the time, right? And learning to carry it in a way that honors it, gives it somewhere to go. And I'm not asking for it to go out there and never come back. I want it to come back. I want you to remember what it meant to love someone that much.
Mm.
I want you to remember how sad it is to see someone go. And I want it to change your relationship with the people that are still around you. Because that's what it does. It takes that hollowness that we feel, and it should, and it does, fill that hollowness back up with love. And I'm
Mm.
not saying it's always love, but I'm saying love is there, right? When my girlfriend died suddenly in 2015, I regretted so many things. I regretted not seeing her name and swiping and saying I'll call her later. I regretted like canceling plans. I regretted feeling like, oh, I just can't deal with what she's dealing with right now. I can't be that friend for her. And my relationship with her is so much better now than it was when she was alive. And I she taught me to love. She taught me Her death taught me how to love. Her death taught me how to show up. Her death taught me how to hold on to those precious little moments, even when it's hard to. So there's so much I gained. I carry my grief for her so much differently today than I did when she died, or than I did when my grandfather died, or I did when my uncle died. Right. So I feel like you hold grief differently as you learn the skill of grieving.
To
And
learn those
yeah.
skills, you cannot run away from it. You do have to lean into it. I was going to ask you, what was the most personal death that you've experienced? You listed different people there. I don't know if it's fair to ask what was the most personal or most impactful, but they as you just made that list, it depends on how they impact, I suppose.
They're all different in different ways, right? Brie is a good example, right? That one taught me a lot, right? Um, Seeing my pet die.
Oh, yes.
When my dog died, she one of my dogs died at the same week my father-in-law died.
Okay.
And I don't know why, and I can't explain it, but I can accept it that I bawled my eyes out for that dog. And if I was to put some judgy lenses on it, I cried more for her than I did my father-in-law, right? And everyone goes, "Oh, like, yeah, but there's, just a dog, just get another one." And I'm like, anyone who's lost a pet knows that it is so much bigger than just a dog or just an animal. So I feel like every death I get better at honoring the space, and there's something different that I'm grateful for every time. I was taking care of a an author as he was dying with cancer, and his his gift to me was reading out loud. I am never good at reading out loud, but he asked me, "Sarah, would you mind reading the newspaper to me?" And I would have to sit and read the newspaper to him. And I was horrible at reading out loud, but I can tell you, after I did that for 6 months every Sunday, I got really good at reading out loud. And he would compliment me on the way that I read. He would compliment me on so many things that I just went like, "Oh, thank you for this gift that you gave me. And if it wasn't for your death, I wouldn't have it."
Hmm.
Right. And that to me, yeah. And another wonderful, a girlfriend of mine, her husband had died, and she had older children who then went off to school. And it was the first time in her entire life that she was an empty nester. There is a grief inside of that all it brings all of it back again, right? All of what was supposed to have been,
Mm,
what was, and what will never be,
yes.
right? This idea that this was supposed to be the golden age of us is now the golden age of me, right? So I think there's just so many beautiful moments that happen because of death.
I would
That
agree. How do you manage yourself and your emotions after being here in so many spaces for people? What is your decompression tool? How does that work for you that you step away from that?
I have a few ways. I prepare my so I have a few practices that I engage in. I have a movement practice that helps me through that to move hard emotions through. I do a movement practice. There's a thing called TRE, which is trauma release exercises. You're shaking your
Mhm.
head because yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I do TRE to kind of release when it's really heavy. When I was working with healthcare workers through the pandemic, I did that one a lot because there was a lot held, a lot of suicide calls, right? A lot of holding space for those that completed suicide. So there was a lot that I was holding on to through that. But before I go into a session, I sit for 5 minutes and I decide what I am grateful for. And what does the room need from me? So I pick out something that I'm like, I get to spend this moment with these people, and no one else will ever be able to do this. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm humbled by this opportunity. And then what do they need from me? They probably need me to slow everything down. So I need to be slow. They probably need patience. They probably need a little space, a little boundary holding, a little container holding. And so and then when I'm done, I do some intention setting, I do some movement, and I on occasion still engage in TRE. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ultimately, when I go into these really hard spaces, everyone that I'm speaking to is holding on to grief like it's this 50-pound ball that they've been holding up for 25 years, right? And I'm sitting there holding on to gratitude. And that exchange, and we just exchange a little bit back and forth every now and then, right? And so we end up weaving these two things together. And so by being able to hold on to gratitude, I actually have the easiest job on the planet, to be able to do and hold that for people.
And you've learned, thank you for sharing that. You have learned this over time. How do you approach the person that is in a place of grieving, that they're not learning anything? They're not trying to have a teachable moment. This just hurts.
It just hurts. So they need to be witnessed first, right? There needs to be a witnessing that happens. I'm here. Tell me about it. Where does it hurt? How does it hurt? Where in your body do you feel it the most? When in your day do you feel it? Is it Friday when you're going to be done work and now you've got the weekend and you're alone, right? Tell me all about it. I want to know. Tell me about your person, right? Saying their name. No one says their name anymore, right? No one wants to talk about it anymore, but I can guarantee you their name's running through their head every day.
Yes.
Yeah. So being able to say their name and them hearing it on someone else's lips, that's a beautiful thing in my mind. So in my space, ultimately, I really just want to hear it. I want to witness what it is. And if they honor me with that, then the next phase for me is really, there are no words that can make you feel better. There's a one thing I can say that's going to take any of that away, but I can tell you I'm here. I'm here, and I'm going to show up all the time. I'm going to show up to the point where you're going to tell me to get the heck out. You don't want to see me anymore. I would rather you tell me no 1,000 times than for you to be alone.
That right there, people are so alone, even when they're with people, that going back to the statement you made about someone feeling like they're a burden, even in their grief. And what I hear you say, you in the witnessing part, to acknowledge that their feelings are real and validate them and be present with them. Those three things, they're not huge, but that showing up in the consistency, because they know that you cannot do the ultimate desire, which is to bring the loved one back. But showing up and really being in the space that you said you were going to be in is very important. Important.
And it's different than call me if you need me, right? Because
oh, please, because they're never going to pick up the phone. I need you to kind of bum rush me. I need you to show up. I need you, because I don't have the energy to even eat or even do anything, let alone think about calling you, who may be out living your best life, and all of a sudden do not want to be bothered in my death world, in my grief. So you don't never pick up the phone because you've talked yourself out of it instead of picking it up.
For sure, right? Like my neighbor, her mother died, And it was in the dead of winter. It was in the dead of COVID. And there was no one anywhere. Every morning, I sent my son down the street to wipe the snow off her car. I'm like, just wipe her car off. So when she gets out of the house, because she's got to go get back to work when, frankly, she should be taking leave, she doesn't have to wipe her damn car off. How about
Yes.
that? Right? Don't ask, just do.
Girl, say
Right?
that again. Say that again.
Don't ask, just do.
And what I hear, like, okay, you do things, it's like I see a need. You're not
Yeah,
encroaching upon their life personally, but you're seeing something that you could do, and it just lightens the load. So
exactly.
those things, like, the restaurant they go to, you don't want to cook, drop off some gift cards. You know that they need laundry detergent. You happen to know the type, a gas card, because you see what, but people go, well, I don't know what to do. Whatever you say, don't say, let me know whatever you need, because that's annoying. Because now you've put the burden on the person that's grieving to try to figure out what to ask you. And then you go, I don't want to do that, or I do want to do this. And it's like, you could buy a cleaning service, a gift card for any grocery store. You could just countless think, if you are in a place that you are staring at paint on the wall, what could you need?
You got it. You got
If
it.
they have a pet, buy their pet some food. Some of
Be a
oh
dog walker. Show up and say, I'm going for a walk. Give me your dog.
yes,
Right? I'm going for a walk. Give me your dog. Right?
yes.
You don't have to do anything but hand me a leash and hand me that dog
Mm.
and a poo bag.
Need the poo
Right?
bags now. Need the poo bags
Right?
now.
And
What?
like, and sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to talk about the needs of men
Yes.
when they're grieving, right? Because I find them a little bit different. They interact with grief a little bit different than women do. We're really good at talking, right? We're really good at this
Oh yeah,
engagement,
they've
this
used
back
up
and
their words in the first hour of the day, and we're over there recharging more words for the day.
forth, right? And then they go off and they build like a shed, right? Or they go build a company, or they go decide to do an Ironman, right?
Hmm.
There's so many layers to this that we're apprenticing with it, right? Everyone on the face of the planet is apprenticing grief.
Huh.
You're
I
never
never
going to get
thought
it.
of it that way. We really are.
We
Huh.
are.
Because everybody does it differently, but our people skills and who we are does impact how that grief does with us, because women, we will chat more, we will talk. The world has given us permission to emote our emotions, where men may not have always been given that permission. So they're holding inside that hurt and that pain and what that looks like. I can see that. That makes sense.
So women who are supporting men that are grieving,
Hmm.
right? How do you do that? You go for a walk, right? And you have a talk while you're walking, right? You go fishing, you go hunting, right? You go and do something together
Hmm.
that you can have a wee conversation
A
about.
we.
Right?
Not a lot, but just enough to be like, okay, we're in there until they start getting super chatty. You are
That's
so
right.
right. A we conversation. I like that. I like that. When
Oh,
when we were when you were thinking about this conversation we would have, what were some things that you were in your mind saying, I definitely want to make sure we talk about this, this, and this? What were some of those things?
I think there's creating conversation about this in every day, right? That if we are holding on to curiosity and we are curious about end of life, that is a conversation that we can have. That it doesn't have to be, what do you want? What do you imagine?
Mm,
Is a beautiful way of kind of breaking through some of those like really hard feelings around it. And it also takes the ownership off of people to have an idea. Right? It kind of says, well, I don't know, but I always wondered about, or I thought about. So how do you have the conversation in a way that takes the pressure off? I think is really important. That was one of the things I really wanted to talk about. And I hear a lot of people out there who are coaches and um, who do a lot of care for people around, hashtag be happy, hope work, mindfulness. I have a hard time being able to see that work being the purposeful and filled with passion, though, if we aren't addressing the hard conversation of grief. So I think that I really wanted to hold on to this idea for a minute, that if we were to do meaningful work, if we were to embrace life, if we were to embrace pleasure and passion and desire inside of our life, that we absolutely have to embrace our journey with grief.
Mm. So no
Um,
more slapping these hashtags words on it because it's very topical, but literally get into the very nitty gritty of it all is what I hear you saying.
got it, right? And because I think a lot of people think of grief as just sadness. And going back to our earlier conversations and listening to the story of Bree, there was so much honor and beauty in that moment. You cannot tell me grief is just about sadness. That moment was filled with passion for me. It was such a pleasurable moment for me. You can't tell me that grief is always sad and hard, because it is beautiful and it was raw and it was heartbreaking and it was heart filling all at the same time. How do we carry it? How do we have gratitude before hope? How does having gratitude before hope change hope? There's so much inside of just the awareness of it. If we're willing to trust ourselves with it and journey with it, perhaps we can let go of the hard harshness of it so that we can embrace the beauty of it.
Thank you. You
Just
mentioned before about hoping for, I think you said the wrong thing. I want to circle back a little bit about what are things to hope for at that moment versus the things that we may hope for that don't serve us well from your experience.
Yeah, I think again, this may be better done through a little bit of a story.
Go for it.
It's a bit of a combination of stories. So when I sat in hospice, I would have a family sit with me, and they literally, this is going back a few years, but they would literally pull out their paper, like their agendas out of their wallet and say, okay, so I hope that doctor doesn't like gets us in off that wait list and gets us into the whatever earlier, right? This appointment earlier. I wonder if who's going to be here for this meeting, like this is supposed to happen 3 days from now. Who's going to be here for that, right? I hope one of us can be here, right? And I hope it's one of us kids and not mom, because then we don't get the details. And so there's all this hope that happens for uh for around betterment, around
Okay.
improvement, right? Of let's hope that we have everything we need in this moment, right? Whereas if I sit inside that same moment with the man that was dying and I had gratitude, I'm like, gosh, life with you was hard, but it was good. And the one thing that I'm really grateful for was he always had time to listen to me, right? He always sat there with me, right? He always sat there with me, and he listened to my silly stories when I was little. And he always had that picture I drew him, and it was in his wallet. Check his wallet, see if it's still there, right? And now what am I hoping for, right? I hope I can be like him. I hope I listen to my grandchildren the same way he listened to my children. He really taught me how to be more present in the moment. I'm going to tell him, oh, Dad, I really hope I can be more like you. Dad, I really hope I can be what you were to my grandchildren. The conversation completely changes from an operational to the hopes and dreams of a heart. That's the big difference. That's the shift gratitude gives us. right? I'm really grateful for him to have this beautiful room inside of this hospice center. How lucky are we? Totally changes it, right? There's so much that happens inside of these moments. There's so much swirling, right? That we get caught up in what we should do, have to do, should have done, didn't do, and who's not doing what I said.
Who's not doing what I said?
I
I
told
like
him
that
to
part. That right there. I'm so glad I asked you that question. I'm so glad that we came back to that. I'm a little bit of a switch.
Okay, I like.
Any questions you have of me?
Oh, well, we're gonna need a whole.
Okay, give me one or two. One or two.
What is how are you currently holding grief, Tina?
I am very grateful for my therapist,
Yes.
that I see on a regular basis. And when Widowhood Real Talk with Tina started, he had a lot of concerns that he um, articulated to me, and we check in on how that goes. I make time for myself this morning to get up and doing some yoga. Didn't do the whole 45 minutes that I wanted, but I did that. I try to make time for me to exercise because that feeds my soul. I can get really wrapped up in, do we have the episode going out? What's going on with this next? Where is this at? A meeting with the board members. We have a webinar being scheduled. Where am I with all of those things? And I'm realizing for me, I need to spend more time in prayer with God and hearing where He wants to take Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, that I'm trusting this to be His work to be done for people in this world, not something that I'm making happen. So when I put that in perspective, it reminds me I have a limited amount of time in this world. And then if this is what God will make purpose out of my own late husband's death, then I'm grateful for every message, every situation that someone shares that they benefited from me sharing this. My daughter just got engaged. I'm looking forward to seeing where that will go. I got me remarried in February of 2022. I have a husband to spend time with who is extremely supportive. So I feel like I'm holding grief in that moment when I'm there with this person, when we're having the conversation, when I'm there with them. But I know I cannot make it different. I cannot walk away from that and hold that as if it is my own to change. I can share, I can provide information, resources, advice, but I always say, I'm here with you as you decide how this is going to go for you. Your journey, there are some people that have made a vow that their spouse died, they will never get remarried, and this is the way grief will go. I respect that. There are some people that have made a decision that their journey with grief will be very hard and difficult. If that is what it is, if they allow me space to sit there with them in that. There are some people that want to talk. There are some people that may reach out and they say, can I talk to you? And we'll set up something on Zoom, and I'll be there in that space with them. But I know it is each individual person's journey. I say that to say that my perspective is being there with them, knowing I can't make it different for them. I can provide options, and I need to keep myself refreshed so then I'm good to show up for other people.
May I ask you what your first husband's name was?
Mark, Mark.
What part of Mark's legacy are you holding on to?
What part of what?
How are you living Mark's legacy?
Widowhood Real Talk with Tina is a whole legacy for Mark.
Yes.
That the sheer existence of this nonprofit organization, he is the catalyst for this. My daughter is actually one of the board members. And to see her stand up in a place and talk about her dad, this provided the opportunity where that didn't exist before. When I can share the story of my husband's life and his death and his giving me permission to continue living, is always his legacy. I'll tell you, my last name is Cornwall. That is my late husband's last name. I did not change it when I remarried. And when my current husband and I were talking, and I said, "Well, what do you think about a name change?" And he instantly said, "But your children would not have a parent with the same last name." And I love that he knew me well enough to know how important that was. There's not a hyphenated, there's not a abridged version. My children, and that was one of their biggest concerns. Mom, if you get married, like, are you going to change your name? And to know that wasn't a hang up for him. So, and as I'm doing widowhood, he is telling people this is what my wife is doing. She's helping people who are grieving. He shows up in that spot and gives me space to use my journey to help someone else. So, by the sheer fact of my last name still being Cornwald, creating an entire 501(c)(3) nonprofit to support people who are grieving to know that they are not alone is how I am living out Mark's legacy.
And can I ask what your current husband's name is?
His name is Fred. That's fine.
Fred.
2 four-letter
That
names.
is, Fred. Thank you, Fred. Thank you for your
Yeah,
work.
he
Yes.
is extremely supportive.
I love the work he does. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I do, but I mean,
Okay,
how much time?
go ahead, go ahead.
Am I? Am I
Yeah,
allowed?
uh-huh.
So, I mean, widow
Oh, good
big,
gosh.
and I've seen some of your past topics. I loved the comment with Abel, in one of your last I can't remember his last name, but
Oh,
he
Abel
said
Kia,
Julie can't
yes.
take.
Mhm.
He said Julie can't take my grief away, and I think Julie was
Yes.
his current
Yeah.
relationship.
Mhm.
That's it. Julie and Fred, right? They're kind of the same person, it feels like. And I feel like there's something inside of this dating again piece that you've presented on quite a bit, right? That
Mhm.
I wanted to hold on to just for a quick moment,
Okay.
because what happens when you get sad? What does your partner do?
You know, I can speak from my perspective.
Yeah,
When Fred and I were dating, we had been dating, I want to say 4 or 6 months. We had been out for the evening, came back to my place to hang out for a little bit, and I was getting us something to drink. And I was in motion walking towards him, and it dawned on me that that day was my 1-year anniversary of living in Virginia. Now, Mark and I had this plan of moving to Virginia, and I'm looking at this point, somewhat a stranger, sitting in this new place that I live for the first time by myself. I had never lived alone. I met Mark
yeah.
in the military. We got our first apartment together. So I'm walking towards this guy. This seems pretty decent. And I just start crying because this is not what I thought my life was going to look like on my 1-year anniversary of living in Virginia. And he looks at me. He does a smart thing. He takes the glasses out of my hand and puts them down. First of all, I give him credit for that. And then he said, "What's wrong?" Like, we were having a good time, and all of a sudden, and I said, "You seem like a nice enough guy." But I realized at this moment, I've lived in Virginia for 1 year, and this is not what I thought my life was going to be like when I moved here. And his response was, how can I be here for you? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to hold you? Do you want me not to touch you? Do you want me to leave? You want me to stay? He said, but whatever you want, you never have to feel bad for being sad about your late husband because you loved him and this is not what you wanted. One, I think, oh, well, I think we got a winner here. Two, two, I said, can we just sit on the couch? And I just needed to cry. And he just held me. And we sat there for quite a bit. So he asked me how I felt. Two, he didn't feel offended or felt like it was an attack on his pride because I am crying about this other man. He understood and gave me space to feel however I needed to feel and didn't make it about him. So I say that to say, one, communicate with this person that you're dating, widow or widower, and when they're sad, or maybe before they get sad, because inevitably they will, ask them, How do you want me to show up? It may say they don't know. It may be different with each experience, but ask the question and don't put the burden on them to feel awkward, like we're dating. I think I like them. I don't want them to be in their feels when I tell them I'm always, but no, I was with Mark for 32 years. That doesn't go away. It shows up differently. When his
Yep.
birthday comes, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's God good, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. My birthday, we had the nerve to get married the day after my birthday. So our wedding anniversary, that seemed cute when you were young. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what was that thinking? What? So when those things happen, and now my daughter's going to get married, her dad is not there. How does that show up? So Fred, one, being strong and confident in who he is and knowing that I'm with him because of who he is. He doesn't have to compare himself to Mark. Show up in your space, be confident in that, and just support me as needed. That has been proved helpful for me.
Beautiful.
It really
Yeah.
is. I would have never, ever thought that this was a possibility. Actually, last night, so we got married February 2022. Last night we had a check-in with our pastor to see how married life was going, and I was like, we're good. It's like we talked a lot. The dating experience was a big interview. This wasn't just like, I think you're cute, you think I'm cute. No, I am a whole 51-year-old woman. I got questions.
I
Next
got a
page,
list.
more questions. Next page, more questions. Interview, but more questions. Like, please.
So
But it was
good.
worth the work. It was
Yes.
worth the work to be here now.
Mhm.
Because another thing that people may try to do not try to replace somebody in your life instead of dealing with your grief. Those are separate. If you find that you have more love to give, if you find you have the capacity to be in that space with somebody, but do your work, know yourself, deal with your grief. It will always be there in some form or fashion, but it's not a plug and play that your spouse died and you throw somebody else in that space. I don't see it ending well for most people unless you're dealing with grief maybe 1 month, 30 days, 6 years, but whatever that is, knowing yourself and being honest before you bring somebody else into that space.
Beautiful, right? And I think it's interesting because I've, seen a few different ways that people have kind of expressed grief. And it really depends on the situation, right? We grieve so many different relationships that we can even grieve, the death of our partner who was violent. Right?
Yes.
And so I've seen so many different outcrops, I guess, is a way of looking at it on how grief shows up in our world. And I liken it to this idea of remembering who we are, this journey of remembering who we are. Because we're so used to being half of something, that journey sometimes is wild.
I'm
But
just right there. Your identity is becomes intertwined, which rightfully so, with this person you're living your life with. I often say it took me a long time to learn how to say Tina, not Mark and Tina, not Tina and Mark, but it was my mouth said his name and said my name. I did not know how to just say Tina and what
and
that
no
looked like, and that to be okay. That was enough because that's who I have been. We were together, but to be okay with me. And I was okay with the idea that I may be single. 32 years is good and have a good guy. You don't always, some people go their whole life wishing they would have that once. And I had become okay with the idea that I'm good. Lo and
one.
behold, that something more happened, but learning that space of I am enough was something that I did come to terms with.
So I also wanted to mention my friend of mine, her father had died and was supposed to walk her down the aisle.
Mm,
Um, so her stepdad walked her down the aisle of her death. So it was just this beautiful kind of um, ripple that was honored through the journey of into transition, and being able to have that moment of seeing him withholding
Mhm.
the photo, right? Now she was
Mm.
young when the stepfather came into her life. So
Right.
it was just a beautiful way of kind of transitioning and honoring the person that gave birth to her. But
That is beautiful.
so beautiful. I just feel like there's so many beautiful ways that we can integrate loss into our
Yes.
life, right? Like, and it takes the smallest of moments. Like, even like to your point, that idea of not saying like Mark and Tina, right? There's when you just start saying Tina, it feels a little sad,
Oh, it was
right?
brutal. It felt like it was like, oh, but then it became like, what does Tina want? Who is Tina? Then it was like a little, okay. And
It had
and
a little sachet to it, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah. And the smallest of moments, right? Because you still got mail. You still got mail with his name all over it.
Hold on, just like a couple of months ago, it has not stopped.
It
Like
has
I
no
used
stop.
to. And okay, so the piece of mail that came recently was from a cremation service. I was like, I don't think you can do it twice. I literally, and the place is local. I literally thought about taking the card and his urns and putting it on their counter and go, how you want to do this? How you want to? But I was like, okay, maybe that's a little over the top. But they had me. I was like, I don't think we can do this twice.
What is that? Right?
All right, two final questions for you.
Yes.
What gives you joy?
Hearing my children say, I love you,
Mm,
growing carrots, hearing thank you, hearing laughter at a funeral. Yeah. There's, it's the smallest of littlest things that mean so much to me now. Yeah. The small smelling something that just I wasn't expecting to smell, right? In a good way, right? Like, you're walking through the garden, you're like, oh, lilacs, right? Like it just there's just appreciation in the little smallest of moments. The other thing that brings me such deep joy is when it was all for something, when we can make it for something, when we can turn it into a podcast and help millions of people.
yes.
Yes, that's something. So, yeah.
If you could pick any age or range to speak to younger Sarah, what timeline would you pick and what would you tell her?
I'm not ready yet to talk to her. I want to be an old woman. I think I want to be an old woman and I want to talk to her when she is 8. I want to be an old woman. I'm not
Okay.
quite there.
Okay. If I want to get in contact with you, how do I do that? How do people reach you? How does that work?
Well, I have a website
Uh,
that I'm pretty active on. So it's griefadvocacy.com. And my email is sarah@griefadvocacy.com. And I'm there. And I help when I can help, right? It's it's during the pandemic, it was a little hard, right? But we're in a better place now where our feet are on, the sand instead of treading water in the deep, dark ocean. So yeah, that's the best place to reach me.
And thank you for sharing that. And that will be in the blog and in the comments, and you can email me if you didn't receive that information. You spoke a lot about in-person work that you do. Is there a virtual component to the services that you offer? And if so, what do those look like?
Definitely. So our work is mostly now focused on workplace grief. So how do we change bereavement policies and processes to ensure that you come back to a workplace that understands that things get a little swirly and has support systems rather than just pushing you off the benefits, So that's the big part of my mission now. But I also have and that's done in person and online. So I have a Leading Through Loss program that's online, that's self-paced, and it helps leaders navigate employee bereavement leave with templates and tools and all the amazing things that they need in the moment. And then I also just launched 2 new courses. I have an HR course that helps HR leaders develop the policies and the processes as a foundation. And then I also have a coaching through loss. So for life coaches, executive coaches, career coaches to kind of come in and learn a little bit about grief and how to incorporate grief into their programs. So that starts, this just a few weeks from now, and they're all available on my website to see them there. Yeah.
Thank you. And I wanted to talk about all of the things you've done. So as they lean in and understand what you provide professional, what has been the bedrock for this knowledge that you're able to bring to them and how you're able to share. This is not theoretical. You have been in the trenches of being here with people, and now to be able to help people in a different methodology as far as in the workplace and setting a good framework for that. Going back to your friend 25 years ago, being an advocate for them.
You got it.
Thank you for the amazing work that you are doing for people, Sarah. I will allow you to close up this podcast however you want to.
However I want.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to requote my definition on grief. Does that work?
this is your decision.
Oh, okay. So grief is us growing a skill set, and that we will ebb and flow, will expand and contrast every day. But grief reminds us that every day is precious, and it also reminds us to love again. And with that, I am so grateful that you and I were able to ebb and flow through this conversation, that you reminded me and asked me and told me moments in every day that held you and held me. And I am so glad that you found love again. Thank you.
Hello, Widowhood. Thank you for joining Sarah and I for this conversation today. And I want you to know there is more to come. Sarah and I are planning some workshops for 2024. So please keep a lookout on our event page on our website. Thank you for being here. And I am sorry for the person that you have lost that has driven you to this conversation. But I am so grateful that you have made us part of your hood. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.